Glamour by Stephen Vincent Benét. I used to read quite a lot of books when I was younger, but now they just make me sore. Marion keeps on bringing them back from the lending library, and occasionally I'll pick one up and read a few chapters. But sooner or later, you're bound to strike something that makes you sick. I don't mean dirt or anything, just foolishness, and people acting the way they never act. Of course, the books she reads are mostly love stories. I suppose they're the worst kind. But what I understand least is the money angle. It takes money to get drunk, and it takes money to go around with a girl. At least that's been my experience. But the people in those books seem to have invented a special kind of money. What? It only gets spent on a party or a trip. The rest of the time they might as well be paying their bills with wampum, as far as you can figure it out. Of course, often enough, the people in books are poor. But then, they're so darn poor. It's crazy. And, often enough, just when everything's at its worst, some handy little legacy comes along, and the new life opens out before them right away, like a great big tulip. Well, I only had one legacy in my life, and I know what I did with that. It darn near ruined me. Uncle Bernard died up in Vermont in 1924, and when his estate was settled, it came to $1,237.62 apiece for Lou and me. Lou's husband put her share in Greater Los Angeles real estate. They live out on the coast, and I guess they've done pretty well. But I took mine and quit the firm I was with. Rosenberg and Jenkins, Mechanical Toys and Novelties, and went to Brooklyn to write a novel. It sounds crazy, looking back on it. But I was a bug about reading and writing in those days, and I'd done some advertising copy for the firm that pulled. And that was the time when everybody was getting steamed up about the new American writers, and it looked like a game without much overhead. I just missed the war. I was 17 when it finished, and I'd missed college because of Father's death. In fact, I hadn't done much of anything I really wanted since I had to quit high school. Well, though the novelty business was all right as businesses go. So when I got a chance to cut loose, I cut. I figured I could easily live a year on the 1200, and at first I thought of France. But there'd be the nuisance of learning frog talk and the passage there and back. Besides, I wanted to be near a big library. My novel was going to be about the American Revolution, if you can picture it. I'd read Henry Esmond over and over, and I wanted to write a book like that. Now I guess it must have been a bunch of my New England ancestors that picked Brooklyn for me. They were pioneers, all right, but gosh, how they hated to take any chance but a big one. And I'm like that myself. I like to feel tidy in my mind when I'm taking a chance. I figured I could be as solitary in Brooklyn as I could in Pisa, and a lot more comfortable. I knew how many words it took to make a novel. I'd counted some of them. Now, so I bought enough paper and a second-hand typewriter and pencils and erasers. That about cleaned out my ready cash. I swore I wouldn't touch the legacy till I was really at work, but I felt like $1 million. I swear I felt as if I were looking for treasure. When I got into the subway that shiny autumn day and started across the river to look for a room. It may have been my ancestors that sent me to Brooklyn, but I don't know what landed me at Mistress Forge's, old wrestling Southgate, the one who was bothered with witches, would probably have called it a flowered snare of the fiend. And I'm not so sure, looking back, that he'd have been wrong. Mistress Forge opened the door herself. Serena was out. They'd talked about putting an ad in the paper, but they just never got around to it. And naturally, they wouldn't have put up a card. If it hadn't looked like the sort of house I'd wanted, I'd never have rung the bell. As it was, when she came to the door, I thought that I had made a mistake, so the first thing I did was beg her pardon. She had on her black silk dress, the one with the white ruffles, just as if she were going out calling in the barouche. The minute she started to speak, I knew she was Southern. They all had that voice. I won't try to describe it. There's nothing worse than a whiny one. It beats the New England twang. But theirs didn't whine. They made you think of the sun and long afternoons and slow rivers. And time? 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 Just sliding along like a current, not going anywhere particular, but gay. I think she liked my begging her pardon, for she took me in and gave me a slice of fruit cake and some lemonade, and I listened to her talk and felt somehow, as if I'd been frozen for a long time and was just beginning to get warm. There was always a pitcher of lemonade in the icebox, though the girls drank Coke, mostly. I've seen them come in from the snow, in the dead of winter, and drink it. They didn't think much of the cold, anyway, so they more or less pretended it didn't exist. They were that way. The room was exactly what I wanted. Big and sunny, with an outlook over a little backyard where there was the wreck of a forsythia bush and some spindly grass. I've forgotten to say the house was in one of those old-fashioned side streets, not far from Prospect Park. But it doesn't matter where it was. It must be gone now. You know, it took all my nerve to ask Mistress Forge the price. She was very polite, but she made me feel like a guest. I don't know if you can understand that. And then she couldn't tell me. "Well now, Mr. Southgate," she said, in that soft, gentle, helpless voice that ran on as inexorably as water. "I wish my daughter Eva had been here to receive you. My daughter Eva has accepted a business position since we came here for my daughter Melissa's art training. And I said, only this morning, 'Eva, honey, no. Suppose Serena's away and some young person comes here, asking for that room. I'll be bound to say something to them, sugar, and I'll feel right embarrassed.' But just then some little boy started shouting down the street, and I never did rightly hear what she answered. So if you're in a hurry, Mr. Southgate, I don't just know what we can do." "I could leave a deposit," I said. I'd noticed, by this time, that the black silk had a tear in it, and that she was wearing a pair of run-down ball slippers. Incredibly small they were, but all the same, she looked like a duchess. All the same, she looked like a duchess. "Why, I suppose you could, Mr. Southgate," she said with an obvious lack of interest. "I suppose that would be businesslike. You gentlemen in the North are always so interested in business. I recollect Mr. Forge saying before he died, 'Call them Yankees if you like, Millie. But we've all got to live in the same country, and I've met some without horns.' Mr. Forge was always so humorous. We're quite accustomed to Northerners. You don't happen to be kin to the Mobile Southgates, do you, Mr. Southgate? You'll excuse an old lady's asking, but you seem to favor them a little, now your face is in the light." I'm not trying to put down just the way she talked. She didn't say and nah. It was something lighter and suaver. But her talk went on like that. They all did it. It wasn't nervousness or trying to impress you. They found it as easy and restful to talk as most of us do to keep still. And if the talk never got anywhere, they'd never expected it would. It was like a drug. It made life into a dream. And of course, it isn't that. Finally, I simply went for my stuff and moved in. I didn't know how much I was paying or what meals would be included in it, but I somehow felt that these things would be shown unto me when the time was ripe. That's what an hour and a half with Mistress Forge did to me. But I did resolve to have a clear understanding with my daughter, Eva, who seemed to be the business head of the family. Serena let me in when I came back. I gave her 50 cents to get in her good graces, and she took an instant dislike to me, which never wavered. She was small and black and withered, with bright little sparks of eyes. I don't know how long she'd been with them, but I thought of her growing on the family, like mistletoe, from immemorial time. Whenever I heard her singing in the kitchen, I felt as if she were putting a private curse on me. Honeybird. She'd croon. Honeybird. No one gwine to fly away wid my honeybird. Old buzzard, he try his wings. He flap, and end he flap. Man wid a gun he see him. Hi. He. Shoot old buzzard wid a buckshot, and never tetch ma honeybird. I knew who the old buzzard was all right, and it may sound funny, but it wasn't. It was spooky. Eva wouldn't see it. They'd all treat Serena like a combination of unavoidable nuisance and troublesome child. I don't understand how they can treat servants that way. I mean, friendly and grand at the same time. It isn't natural. It sounds as if I were trying to keep from telling about Eva. I don't know why I'm doing that. I got unpacked and pretty well settled. My room was on the 3rd floor back, but I could hear the girls coming home. There'd be the door and steps and a voice saying, "Honey, I'm so tired. I'm just plumb dragged out." And Mistress Forge saying, "Now, honey, you rest yourself." There were 3 of those. I kind of wondered why they were all so tired. Later on, I found that was just something they said. But then, Mistress Forge would begin to talk, and they wouldn't be tired anymore. They'd be quite excited, and there'd be a good deal of laughter. I began to feel very uncomfortable. And then I got stubborn. After all, I'd rented the room. So, when Eva finally knocked at the door, I just grunted, "Come in," the way you would to a chambermaid. She opened the door and stood in the doorway, hesitant. I imagine Melissa had bet her she wouldn't have the nerve. "Mr. Southgate, I believe," she said, quite vaguely, as if I might be anything from a cloud to a chest of drawers. "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" I said. There was an old picture on the wall, the 2 Englishmen meeting formally in the middle of a paper jungle, but I'll hand her something. She saw I wasn't trying to be fresh. "I reckon we have been making a lot of racket," she said. "But that's mostly Melissa. She never was rightly raised. Won't you give us the favor of your company downstairs, Mr. Southgate? We all don't act crazy. We just sound like it." She was dark, you know, and yet she had that white skin. There's a kind of flower called freesia. When the petals are very white, they have the color of her skin, and there's a strong sweetness to it, strong and ghostly at the same time. It smells like spring with the ghosts in it, between afternoon and dusk, and there's a word they call glamour. It was there. She had small white teeth and red lips. There was one little freckle in the hollow of her throat. I don't know how she happened to have only one. Louisa was the beauty, and Melissa the artist. They'd settled it that way. I couldn't have fallen in love with Louisa or Melissa, and yet I liked to see them all together, the 3 sisters. I'd like to have lived in a big, cool house by a river and spent my life seeing them all together. What fool thoughts you get. When you're young, I'd be the northern cousin who managed the place. I used to send myself to sleep with it. Every night, for months. Mistress Forge wasn't in it, or Serena. It was a big place. It went on for miles and miles. Most of the land wasn't good for much, and the Negroes were bone lazy. But I made them work. I'd get up in the first mist of morning and be in the saddle all day, overseeing and planning. But always I'd be coming back on a tired horse up that flowery avenue, and they'd be waiting for me on the porch. The 3 white dresses bunched like a bouquet. They'd be nice to me, because I was weary. and I'd go upstairs to the room looking over the river and change out of my hot clothes and wash. Then Eva would send me up a long drink with mint in it, and I'd take it slowly. After supper. When I wasn't doing accounts, they'd sing, or we'd all play some foolish sort of round game with ivory counters. I guess I got most of it out of books, but it was very real to me. That's one trouble with books. You get things out of them. Often we got old, but it never seemed to change us much. Once in a while the other girls were married, and sometimes I married Eva. But we never had any children, and none of us ever moved away. I kept on working like a dog, and they accepted it, and I was content. We had quite a few neighbors at first, but I got tired of that. So I made it a river island you could only reach by boat, and that was more satisfactory. It wasn't a dream, you know, or anything sappy like that. I just made it up in my head. Toward the end of the year, I'd lie awake for hours making it up, but it never seemed to tire me. I never really told Eva about it at all, not even when we were engaged. Maybe it would have made a difference, but I don't think so. She wasn't the kind of person you'd tell any dreams to. She was in the dream. I don't mean she was noble or fatal or like a ghost. I've had her in my arms, and she was warm and alive, and you could have had children by her. Because things are that way. But that wasn't the point. That wasn't the point at all. She didn't even have much imagination. None of them had. They just lived. Like trees. They didn't plan or foresee. I've spent hours trying to explain to Mistress Forge that if you had $10, it wasn't just $10. It was something you could put in a savings bank. She'd listen, very politely, but $10 to her was just something that went away. They thought it was fine if you had money, but they thought it was equally fine if you had a good-looking nose. Money was rather like rain to them. It fell, or it didn't, and they knew there wasn't any way to make it rain. I'm sure they'd never have come north at all, if it hadn't been for some obscure family dispute. They often seemed to wonder about it themselves, and I heard the dispute talked about dozens of times, but I never really got the gist of it. Except that it was connected with two things: the new spur track to the turpentine plant, and Cousin Belle, she just acted so mean. She gave up her manners, Mistress Forge would say, placidly. She left us no recos, Bannard. No recos at all. And then the girls would chime in. I suppose they got the money to come north from selling land to the turpentine plant, but even of that I am not sure. Anyhow, they had golden visions, as they would have. Louisa was going to be a great actress, and Melissa a great artist, and Eva. I don't know exactly what Eva expected, even now, but it was something, and it was all going to happen without any real work. It was going to fall from a cloud. Oh yes, Melissa and Louisa went to classes, and Eva had a job, but those, you felt, were stopgaps. They were passing the time till the cloud opened and the manna fell. I'll say this for them. It didn't seem to hurt them to have their visions fail. The only person it really hurt was me. Because I believed them at first. How could I help it? The dream I had wasn't so wrong. They were living on an island in the middle of Brooklyn, a piece of where they came from. People came to the house, art students and such. There were always plenty of young men. But once inside the house, they submitted to the house. Serena would pass the cold ham at supper, and you'd look out of the window and be surprised to find it snowing, for the window should have been open and the warm night coming through. I don't know what rumors they'd ever had before, but in my time there was only myself and Mr. Budd. He was a fat little clerk of 50, very respectable, and he stayed because of the food, for Serena was a magnificent, wasteful cook. Yes, I believed it. I believed in it all. It was like an enchantment. It was glamour. I believed in all they said, and I saw them all going back to Chantry. The three famous sisters with their three distinguished husbands, like people in a fairy tale. We'd all have breakfast together, but the only person who talked much then was Mr. Budd. The Forges never were properly alive till later in the day. At breakfast, you saw them through a veil. Sometimes I'd feel my heart beat, staring at Eva, because she looked like one of those shut flowers in greenhouses. Something shut and mysterious. So you fairly held your breath, waiting for it to open. I suppose it was just because she took a long time to wake up. Then Mr. Budd and the girls would go away, and, when my bed was made, I'd go up and work. I'm not saying much about the novel, but I worked hard on it. I'd made a little chart on cardboard with 365 squares, and each day I'd ink one in. I'd go out for lunch and take a walk afterwards. A man has to have regular exercise, and that's free. Then I'd work some more, until they started to come home. I couldn't work after that. Not after the first months, but I'd make myself not listen for Eva's step. The first time I kissed Eva was the New Year's party. One of Louisa's beaux had brought some red wine and we were singing and fooling around. Serena was off for the evening, and Eva and I were out in the kitchen, looking for clean glasses. We were both feeling gay and it just seemed natural. I didn't even think of it again till the next afternoon when we'd all gone to the movies. And then I suddenly began to shake all over, as if I had a chill, remembering. And she said, "What is it, honey?" And her hand slipped into my hand. That was how it began. And that night, I started inventing the river plantation. And I'm not a fool, and I've been around. But I held hands with that girl through January, February, and most of March before I really kissed her again. I can't explain it at all. She wasn't being coy or mean or trying to fight me. It was as if we were floating downstream in a boat together, and it was so pleasant to look at her and be near her. You didn't need any more. The pain hadn't started then. And yet, all through that time, something in me was fighting to get out of the boat, to get away from the river. It wasn't my river at all, you know. It never was, and part of me knew it. But when you're in love, and you haven't got common sense. By the end of March, the novel was more than half finished. I'd allowed 2 months for revision and making contacts, which seemed sensible. And one evening, it was cold, and Eva and I took a walk in the park. And when we came in, Mistress Forge made us some hot cocoa. The other girls had gone to bed early, for once. And while we were drinking it, Mistress Forge fell asleep in her chair, and we put down our cups as if it were a signal, and kissed. And the house was very quiet, and we could hear her breathing, like sleep itself, through the long kiss. Next morning, I woke up and the air felt warm, and when I looked out in the yard, there were leaves on the forsythia bush. Eva was just the same at breakfast, shut and mysterious, and I was just the same. But when I went up to work, I shook my fist at old Wrestling Southgate, the fellow that was bothered with witches, because I was going to marry Eva, and he could go to grass. I tell you, they didn't plan or foresee. I told Mistress Forge very straight just how I stood, finances and everything, and they treated it like a party. They were all as kind and excited as they could be. Except Serena. She just refused to believe it and sang a lot more about buzzards. And somehow or other, that made me feel queerer than ever, because I knew Serena hated me, but I knew she was a real person. I could understand her. She was close to the ground. And I loved the others. but I didn't understand them, and sometimes I wouldn't be sure they were quite real. It was that way with Eva. Even though we were in love, I could kiss her, but I couldn't be sure that she was always there when I kissed her. It wasn't coldness. It was merely another climate. I could talk for hours about what we were going to do when we were married, and every time I stopped, she'd say, "Go on, honey. It makes me feel so nice to hear you talk." But she'd have been as pleased if I'd sung it instead. God knows I didn't expect her to understand the novelty business, or even writing, but sometimes, I'd honestly feel as if we didn't speak the same language, which was foolish, because she wasn't foreign. I remember getting angry with her one evening, because I found out she was still writing to this boyfriend down south and hadn't even told him about us. She opened her eyes very wide. "Why, honey," she said, in the most reasonable of voices, "I couldn't stop writing Furfew right off like that. I've just always been sort of engaged to Furfew." "Well, now you're engaged to me," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why I can't stop writing him, honey. It would hurt Furfew something dreadful if he knew I had to stop writing him because I was engaged to you." "Look here," I said, wondering which of us was crazy. "Are we going to be married?" "Of course, honey." No. "Then what?" I said. "Has this Furfew got to with it? Are you engaged to him or me?" "Of course I'm engaged to you, honey, and we're going to get married. But Furfew, he's kind of like kin, and we've been engaged a long time. It seems right mean and uncivil to break off with him short like that." "I don't believe it," I said. "I don't believe there are any Furfews. It sounds like something you grow under glass. What's he like?" She thought for a long time. "He's right cute," she said finally, "but he's got a little doings of a black mustache." I managed to find out, however, that he owned the turpentine plant, and was considered quite the John D. Rockefeller of Chantry. I was so used to no one in Chantry ever having any money that was worth anything, that this came as an unpleasing surprise. After that, Furfew used to try to come to the river plantation in a very shiny motor launch with a red and white awning, and I would warn him off with a shotgun. But then the money business began. You like to give a girl presents when you're in love. You like to do things right. Well, Lord knows, Eva was no gold digger. She was as likely to be pleased with a soda as a pair of imported gloves. On the other hand, she was as likely to be pleased with the gloves. I kept on schedule with the work, but I couldn't with the money. Each week I'd be just a little over the line. I tell you, the people in books don't know about money. The people who write them can tell what it's like to be broke, but they don't tell what it's like to go around with clothes enough to cover you and food enough to satisfy you, and still have your heart's desire depend on money you haven't got. See? Sure, I could have gone back in the novelty business and Eva could have kept on working. That would have been right for 9 people out of 10. But it wouldn't have been right for the way I felt about Eva. It can be like that. I wanted to come to her, like a rescuer, I suppose, like a prince, like the northern cousin that saved the plantation. I didn't want to make the best of things. I wanted it all. You can't compromise with glamour, or that's the way I feel. Or, besides, I'd put in 8 months' work on that novel, and it didn't seem sensible to throw it all away. It might be a ladder to climb out on. It might have been. Eva never complained, but she never understood. She'd just say we could all go back and live in Chantry. Well, I'm not that kind of man, if it had only been the river plantation. But, by now, I knew Chantry as well as if I'd been born there, and there wasn't a thing for me to do, except maybe a job in Furfew's turpentine plant. And wouldn't that have been pretty? Then, gradually I got to know that the Forges too were almost at the end of their string. I had to get it casually. They never talked about those things directly, but when you keep on spending what you've got, there comes a time when you don't have it anymore. Only, it always surprised them. I wish I was built that way. It was the middle of July by this time, and one Saturday afternoon, Eva came home and said she'd been let off at her office. They were cutting down the staff. I'd just been going over my accounts, and when she told me that, I started laughing as if I couldn't stop. She looked rather surprised at first, but then she laughed, too. "Why, honey," she said, "you're the killinest. You always take things so serious, and then sometimes you don't take them serious a bit." "It's an old northern custom," I said. "They call it laugh, clown, laugh. For God's sake, Eva, what are we going to do?" "Why, honey," she said, "I suppose I could get me another position." She never told me it was up to me. She never would have, but I just sort of despised those mean old offices. "Do you think I ought to get me another position, honey?" "Oh, darling, it doesn't matter," I said, still laughing. "Nothing matters but us." "That's mighty sweet of you, honey," she said, and she looked relieved. "That's just the way I feel. And when we get married, we'll fix things up right nice for Melissa and Louisa, won't we? And Mother, of course, because she just can't stand Cousin Belle." "Sure," I said. "Sure. When we're married, we'll fix up everything." And we went out in the backyard to look at the forsythia bush. But that night, Furfew brought his launch inshore and landed on the lower end of the island. He pitched camp there, and I could see his fire at night, through a glass. I can't describe the next 2 months very well. They were all mixed up, the reality and the dream. Melissa and Louisa had to give up their classes, so we were all home. And lots of people came to the house. Some of them were callers, and some of them were bill collectors, but whoever they were, they generally stayed to a meal. Serena never minded that. She liked company. I remember paying a grocery bill, with almost the last of my legacy, toward the end. There were 8 hams on the bill, and 10 cases of Coke. It hadn't been paid for a long time. Often, we'd all pile into an old Ford that belonged to one of the art students and go down to a public beach for the day. Eva didn't care so much about swimming, but she loved to lie in the sand, and I'd lie beside her, painfully happy. And we'd hardly say anything at all. My God. But she was beautiful against those beach colors, the clear greens of the water and the hot white and tan of the sand. But then, she was just as beautiful, sitting in the plush rocker in the front parlor, under that green lamp. They say the time between the ordinance of secession and the firing on Sumter was one of the gayest seasons Charleston ever had. I can understand that they'd come to the brink of something, and fate was out of their hands. I got to feel that way. Everything mixed, I tell you. Everything mixed. I'd be sitting on the beach with Eva, and at the same time, I'd be riding around the river plantation, getting reports from my foreman and planning years ahead. I got to love that place. Even toward the end, it was safe. It didn't change. Of course, we kept having more and more trouble with Furfew. He kept extending his lines from the lower end of the island, but it never came to actual warfare, just fights between our men. Meanwhile, I finished the novel and started revising it. And sometimes Eva would say, "Why didn't we get married anyway?" And I knew we couldn't. You can't get married without some future ahead of you. So we started having arguments. And that was bad. Why didn't I just seduce her like the big, brave heroes in books? Well, there were times when I thought it might be the answer for both of us. But it never happened. It wasn't shame or good principles. It just isn't so awfully easy to seduce a dream. I knew they were writing letters, but I didn't want to know any more. I knew the legacy was gone and my savings account was going, but I didn't care. I just wanted things to go on. Finally, I heard that curfew was coming north. I was going around like a sleepwalker most of the time. So it didn't hit me at first. And then it did hit me. Eva and I were out in the backyard. We'd fixed up an old swing seat there, and it was dusky. Serena was humming in the kitchen. "Oh, buzzard, he fly away now. Buzzard, he fly away. I can't sing, but I can remember the way she sang it." It's funny how things stick in your head. Eva had her head on my shoulder, and my arms were around her. But we were as far away as Brooklyn and New York with the bridges down. Somebody was making love, but it wasn't us. "When's he coming?" I said, finally. "He's driving up in his car," she said. "He started yesterday." "Young Lokinva, complete with windshield," I said. "He ought to be careful of those roads. Has he got a good car?" "Yes," she said. "He's got a right pretty car." "Oh, Eva, Eva," I said. "Doesn't it break your heart?" "Why, honey," she said. "Come here to me." We held each other a long time. She was very gentle. I'll remember that. I stayed up most of that night, finishing revision on the novel. And before I went to sleep, Curfew came to the house on the river plantation and walked in. I was standing in the hall, and I couldn't lift a hand to him, so then I knew how it was going to be. He came in the flesh, next afternoon. Yes, it was a good car, but he didn't look like Benedict Arnold. He was tall and black-haired and soft-voiced, and he had on the sort of clothes they wear. He wasn't so old, either. Not much older than I was. But the minute I saw him beside Eva, I knew it was all up. You only had to look at them. They were the same kind. Oh, sure, he was a good businessman. I got that in a minute. But underneath all the externals, they were the same kind. It hadn't anything to do with the faithfulness or meanness. They were just the same breed of cats. If you're a dog and you fall in love with a cat, that's just your hard luck. He'd brought up some corn with him, and he and I sat up late, drinking it. We were awfully polite and noble in our conversation, but we got things settled just the same. The funny thing is, I liked him. He was young Lokenfar. He was little Mr. Fix-It. He was death and destruction to me, but I couldn't help liking him. He could have come to the island when Eva and I were married. He'd have been a great help. I'd have built him a house by the cove, and that's queer. Next day, they all went out in the car for a picnic, and I stayed home, reading my novel. I read it all through, and there was nothing there. I'd tried to make the heroine like Eva, but even that hadn't worked. Sometimes you get a novelty like that. It looks like a world beater till you get it into production. And then you know you've just got to cut your losses. Well, this was the same... proper losses. Well, this was the same proposition. So I took it down to the furnace and watched it burn. It takes quite a while to burn 400 sheets of paper in a cold furnace. You'd be surprised. On my way back, I passed through the kitchen where Serena was. We looked at each other and she put her hand on the bread knife. "I'll like to see you burning in hell, Serena," I said. I'd always wanted to say that. Then I went upstairs, feeling her eyes on my back like the point of the bread knife. When I lay down on the bed, I knew that something was finished. It wasn't only Eva or the novel. I guess it was what you call youth. Well, we've all got to lose it, but generally it just fades out. I lay there a long time, not sleeping, not thinking, and I heard them coming back, and after a while the door opened gently, and I knew it was Eva. But my eyes were shut, and I didn't make a move. So after another while, she went away. There isn't much else to tell. Furphy settled everything up. Don't tell me Southerners can't move fast when they want to. And the packers came, and 4 days later they all started back for Chantry in the car. I guess he wasn't taking any chances. But he needn't have worried. I knew it was up. Even hearing Cousin Belle had come around didn't excite me. I was past that. Eva kissed me goodbye. They all did, for that matter. The mother and the 3 sisters, they were sort of gay and excited, thinking of the motor trip and getting back. To look at them, you wouldn't have said they'd ever seen a bill collector. Well, that was the way they were. Don't write, I said to Eva. Don't write, Mistress Lochinvar. She puckered her brows as she did when she was really puzzled. Why, honey, of course I'll write, she said. Why wouldn't I write you, honey? I am sure she did, too. I can see the shape of the letters, but I never got them because I never left an address. The person who was utterly dumbfounded was Mr. Budd. We camped in the house for a week, getting our own meals and sleeping under overcoats. The lease wasn't up till the first, and Furphy had made an arrangement with the owner, and Mr. Budd couldn't get over it. I always knew they were crazy, he said, but I'll never get such cooking again. I could see him looking into a future of boarding houses. You're young, he said. You can eat anything, but when a man gets my age... He was wrong, though. I wasn't young. If I had been, I wouldn't have spent that week figuring out 3 novelties. 2 of them were duds, but the third was Jiggity Jane. You've seen her. The little dancing doll that went all over the country when people were doing the Charleston. I made the face like Serena's at first, but it looked too lifelike, so we changed the face. The other people made most of the money, but I didn't care. I never liked the darn thing anyway, and it gave me a chance to start on my own. They couldn't stop me after that. You're harder to stop once you get rid of your youth. No, I don't think it was ironic or any of those things. You don't, outside of a book. There wasn't any connection between the 2 matters. That fall I met Marion, and we got married a year later. She's got a lot of sense, that girl, and it's worked out fine. Maybe we did have the children a little quick, but she'd always wanted children a little quick. But she'd always wanted children and a home. You've got something to keep you steady, and if she gets a kick out of reading love stories, let her, so I don't have to. In a book, I'd have run across Eva, or seen Furphy's name in a paper, but that's never happened, and I suppose it never will. I imagine they're all still in Chantry, and Chantry's one of those places that never gets in the news. The only thing I can't imagine is any of them being dead. I wouldn't mind seeing Furphy again. For that matter, as I say, I like the man. The only thing I hold against him is his moving them back, that way. Before the lease was up, it was all right and he had his reasons, but they had 2 weeks left. 2 weeks till the 1st, and that would just have finished the year. And when I get to sleep nowadays, Marion's there in the next bed, so that's all right. 2. I've only tried to go back to the river plantation once, after a convention in Chicago when I was pretty well lit, and then I couldn't do it. I was standing on the other side of the river, and I could see the house across the water, just the way it always was. But it didn't look lived in. At least nobody came to the window. Nobody came out. You are in the Silver Library. If you liked the experience, like and subscribe for more.